Hey everyone, I'm Alyssa. So I've been over the last few months, I started a first semester in a Master's of Literature program and I've been really enjoying it with it. I wanted to talk about the books I've read for this program. I thought I'd put them all in one video because while I'm not going to talk about the program or about like the classes specifically, I really read these differently than the other books I was reading for leisure because they were first of all assigned to me, but then there was also like lectures and discussions and secondary readings, which all affected like the way that I was approaching these books and the way that I was reading them. So I thought it would be useful to put them in one video, and that like feels more like mentally appropriate in my mind. So I guess we might as well jump straight in. I'm gonna group these in the classes that I talked about them, though I'm not necessarily gonna branch out on that very much. But this first one is called Biopolitics and Immigration, and so all of these books kind of have to do with like the migration of people, forced or elective, and the way that sort of racial and ethnical or ethnicity, those dynamics come into play with like assimilation into new cultures, and how politics subliminally or overtly hinder or help people in their movement or affect like quality of life in that way. Anyway, so the first one that I'm going to talk about is White Teeth by Zadie Smith, and this is a multi-generational story about a few families in Britain. I think it takes place in the 90s. We have a Pakistani immigrant family, a Jewish British family, a woman of Jamaican descent who's married to a British man. This multi-generational story it plays off of both the cultural and immigration dynamics as well as like the family dynamics, and I enjoyed seeing sort of the generational element because you have a younger generation that is wanting to assimilate and like trying to fit in, and an older generation that feels really culturally threatened by this, not wanting their children to be westernized completely. I guess this is the case with the Pakistani family especially, I suppose. There's also, I think, like an interesting conversation about post-colonialism and like a reverse colonization where you have a colonizing country that colonized these other countries, and then in our modern era you have like the movement of people back from the peripheral to the core, and that was really interesting. You have some like white savior elements to it, which personally I found really interesting, as well as like some examples of like Islamic radicalization, which this came out, I'm pretty sure, in the year 2000, which meant it's very interesting to read this as a book about Muslim radicalization that was written pre 9/11, but reading it in a post 9/11 world. So I think this book was really interesting. I think that its ambition was like very, like it had a huge scope of topics that it was trying to discuss, and it felt sort of like it lacked focus in a few ways because of that. But I'm pretty sure this is Zadie Smith's first novel, so I definitely am impressed with her as an author and I want to read more of her work, but this wasn't my favorite. I think I gave it like a 3 stars. Okay, the next book I have to talk about is On Black Sister Street by Chika Unigwe. And I've taken this take a few times because I keep on rambling too much. I need to keep it brief. This is a story about some women who are Nigerian who are brought to Antwerp. They come electively, but they don't really know the circumstance. Are stuck. They are in the red light work district working as sex workers. When they arrived, their passports were taken away from them, and they are forced to work off 5 years. For 5 years to work off $30,000 of the debt they owe the man who helped them come to Europe. I think that this book is really important for the subject matter that it brings up, the way that these women are exploited. Like their exploitation is inadvertently emphasized like by law because they are there illegally. If they were to seek legal protection for how they're being exploited, they would be deported back to their home country, and it's either not safe for them to go there or they just have no opportunity and they need to stay in order to like help their families back home. And so they're really stuck in a position where they have very little power, both like inside of a Western civilization, but they're also being suppressed by like Nigerian men and women like from their own race who are running this brothel. So I think that there's a lot of complexity there, and that's very interesting. and it sort of speaks to some, or like modern colonization, the way that these women are being exploited by like Western appetites for their exoticness, and there's like commodification of the Black female body. I think that there's a lot of interesting things there. So ultimately, I think this is a really important topic, and I'm glad I read it even for just like informational reasons to be informed in this. But I didn't love the book. I didn't get along with the writing style. I didn't like it a whole lot. I think another thing that I would just maybe more like mildly mention or quickly mention is that there wasn't a lot of moral nuance. And that feels like a weird thing to say about a book that's about like sexual trafficking or human trafficking of any kind. Because obviously anyone who is perpetuating that industry is evil, and anyone who is a victim of it is not to blame. But it felt like a book that was just about victims and villains, and I don't think there's a single man in the book that is not just an absolutely despicable character trying to exploit these women. And of course that happens, but I just, in terms of speaking of the book, not of like sex trafficking, but speaking of the book, I think that there would have been some real depth added if there were some like morally nuanced characters, because bad things happen in the world not just because evil people want to do them, but because like they get away with it because good people are passive about it. So I think that there could have been something added from like sort of a third dimension of some kind of a character that was somehow complicit but like not evil. And it just, I don't know if I'm articulating that well. I read the book a little bit ago, but I think that could have added a little bit of complexity to it. So there's that. There was also a disabled character, and I didn't like the way that they were handled. I think that they were really like utilized as a plot device, and in this way that was like super inconsistent with the concept of the book, like discussing exploitation. So I didn't like that. But anyway, ultimately I gave this book 2 stars. Wasn't my favorite, but I'm glad I read it, like if only for being more informed about this whole issue, so that's good. Okay, so the next book that I have to talk about is called Exit West by Mohsin Hamid, and it's about Nadia and Saeed. City is unnamed, but a Muslim city, presumably somewhere in Northern Africa or the Middle East, and it's slowly becoming destabilized. And these doors, this sort of magical realism element of the book, these doors are popping up around the world that are connecting, like allowing essentially transportation between between 2 points. So you just walk through the door in one country and you end up somewhere else, with a correlating door somewhere else. And many of these pop up all around the world, and then you have this like mass migration of people, especially from like the global south, moving into like northern, developed, more affluent areas. So I think that this book is super interesting in terms of the way that it sort of puts a spin on the refugee crisis, and the way that you would see like traditionally refugee camps are just on the borders of countries as people are like moving, trying to flee. Instead, these people move through the borders, but they're not necessarily allowed to like assimilate into their new country. So you just see these refugee camps springing up like in the corridor of London where there is a door, and so these refugee camps just move to the other side of the door, but inside the country where they want to be, but they're not necessarily allowed to assimilate there either. So I think that it is like a really good use of an interesting idea to like shift the perspective on the discussion of the migration of people and the cultural and political attitudes towards it by removing like the sort of the actual transportation process as well as like the legal steps involved before you can get to a country. You just like skip that part. And so I think that's really great. And I do like the characters a lot. I thought that they were I liked seeing their progression, and the character arc that the author chose to give them I thought was really good. I think that, and this might seem so silly because we're talking about a book where there's doors that are like magically appearing, but I actually found it a bit unbelievable that these doors worked as well as they did, because at least in the US, where we spend so much money on the military, like these doors popping up would be seen as a huge national security issue, and they never would be allowed to be like operating and people moving through them for more than a day. I just think that there would have been mass surveillance to find these doors, and immediately they would be closed down. Like, people wouldn't actually be able to move through them. So I think in that way I was almost like, well, this is an interesting idea. I don't think that it even would have worked, and I think that's a manifestation of how, like, I mean, like, part of the attitude towards migration anyway. But if the idea appeals to you, like, I think that this book is super interesting in terms of its discussion about the migration of people. I think I gave it about 3 stars, and that's fair enough. It hasn't stuck with me a lot, but I think it's a really good book. Okay, the next book I have to talk about is called The Refugees, and I'm not even going to say the author's name. I don't know how to do it properly. But he himself was a refugee from Vietnam with his parents during the war when he was a child. And this is a short story collection all about Vietnamese refugee stories all after their arrival in the United States, with one exception. One is not exactly like that, but I thought this was such an excellent collection. They're all so great. They are on their surface level entertaining, but every story holds up to like deeper investigation. I thought this was such an excellent collection. I gave it 4 stars, like a really high 4 stars. Honestly, I really liked this collection. I thought it was very good, and I thought it was a refugee experience I've definitely not heard a lot about or read anything about, and so even though I feel like I should have. I feel like this was important for me to be more familiar with. But this is a really excellent collection, and I would really recommend it. I also read this Hostel Life by Melatu Okorie. And this is a Nigerian author writing in Dublin. She was a refugee to Ireland and was part of the direct provision program. One of the stories is about a group of women who are living in the direct provision program, which is like the program that you enter if you are an immigrant, like seeking asylum status in Ireland. It is notoriously really bad. Sometimes it can take like 15 years to get through the program to get your status, and it is like used as a deterrent so that people won't really want to go there, which is something we talked a lot about in our class, which was very interesting. This collection I thought was really great. My favorite was a short story called Under the Awning, which is about a girl who writes a story, and it's sort of a framed narrative, so she's at a writing group sharing with them the story, and then she reads the story inside of the short story. And it's really about like microaggressions and the way that she feels othered and displaced in this new society, and this reading group clearly doesn't really understand or try to empathize with her experience. I think that this author is really talented and uses like a great, she uses form to complement her content in this really great way, and I really like this collection. I also gave it, I think I gave it 4 stars. It was really good. Okay, I think I need to move way more quickly, so I'm gonna move on to another class. We talked about Irish identity, and in this class we read The Gathering by Enright, which is a story about a woman grieving her brother who has committed suicide, and her family's gathering for his wake after his death. And this book is also very much about her remembering an experience from her childhood, or failing to remember, trying to remember this traumatic experience where she cannot recall if her brother was sexually abused by her grandmother's neighbor as a child, and what did or didn't happen to her as well. I think this book really is sort of calling back to cultural history in Ireland, that there were issues with the Catholic Church and pedophilia, but also is very psychological, as this like woman is sort of repeating this trauma and is traumatized not only by like the little bit of memory she has, but the fact that she can't remember. And this sort of circular and stream of consciousness and very internal narrative dialogue is very much sort of about her healing process. And I think that it's like really effective. The first time I read it, I don't think the like writing style. I don't think I grasped what the author was doing, but after like diving more into it, I think it's actually a really incredible book and very accomplished. It's kind of very difficult subject matter, as you can tell, but it also feels just like so Irish and has some really funny elements to it as well, in my opinion. I think the main character, Veronica, is really enjoyable. So anyway, if this appeals to you, I would definitely recommend this book. I think it's a very, very accomplished book. I think it's really quite excellent. Speaking of internal monologues and narratives, I also read Exciting Times by Naoise Dolan, and this I thought was a really excellent book. This has been I feel like it's been pretty popular, so you might have also heard of it and know a little what it's about. It's about a young millennial girl named Ava. She's 22, I think, and she is teaching English in Hong Kong and casually involved in a like friends with benefits situation with a British banker named Julian, and then later Julian, I think I said Julian, and then later meets and becomes attracted to a Hong Kong lawyer named Edith. So Naoise Dolan has been compared to Sally Rooney, which I didn't care a lot for Normal People, and her writing has been sort of put in the group of books of like quintessential millennial voice and things like that, and having the quality of like this really disenchanted millennial or this like angsty or something to it. To be honest, I'm not sure if that genre is for me, but this book I really loved, and I think what worked for me so well is just her ethereal voice, the author's voice, and the voice of Ava as a character. The fact that this is written in her mind so much works so well. There's so many like sharp social observations, and there's a lot of attention to social hierarchy and power dynamics, and the main character is also very concerned with like class status and money and in capitalism in a way that is not like extremely overt, but like a really consistent theme throughout the book. And I think the author has these like really sharp observations that feel really complex because they both reflect a character that is like really competent because she's so socially aware, but I think it also is a manifestation that this kind of need for hyper social awareness is rooted in a social insecurity, and so she's sort of like overcompensating and obsessively compulsive about something she's clearly really uncomfortable about. So I just really liked that sort of complexity. I thought it was really, really good, and Naoise Dolan is very accomplished. I can't wait to read anything else that she writes. This is another book that we read for my class, Bray Watch by, it's not actually by Ross O'Carroll Kelly, it's by Paul Howard, but he writes it as if Ross O'Carroll Kelly, who is the main character, is telling it to him, and so it's almost like hard to find him stated as the author. This is a very Irish book, and I had never heard of it, and apparently it's not extremely common outside of Ireland, but is a well-loved series there. This is the 20th in the book, and it's very satirical, it's very contemporary. Like, Ross is the main character, and his dad is very, very wealthy and has just been elected president of Ireland through the Russians helping him. You can see him on the back. He is very clearly like a Trump character. His mom has 7 surrogates who are pregnant with her babies, and they are all from Eastern Europe. They want to run away with the babies because they think she's going to be a horrible mother. And then like Ross's daughter is very much a Greta Thunberg character that gets like super about the environment. So this author is like really taking the real world social concerns and like real characters as inspiration and then playing them out in this hyper satirical way. It's honestly, it's pretty funny. And there's also, gosh, I don't know how to hold the book. So here's all the surrogate girls. Anyway, there's like, I don't know what to say about this book because it's such a crazy book. It is just, it is quite funny, and it's very, very Irish humor. So I honestly don't think there's a lot of it that I know I missed, and some of it is written like in the vernacular, and so I couldn't even understand all of it if there was like a character with a really strong Irish accent. This is kind of an obscure one. It is the 20th in a series. So anyway, if that's the kind of thing that you think might interest you, I would go for it. But like, I don't know. I don't think I enjoyed this enough to continue with the series, but it was a really like illuminating cultural experience. Let's say that, okay? we'll say that. So that's all I have for my Irish identity class. Let's talk about my American literature class. I have it here. Okay, the next one is Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is a very accomplished book and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very elegant, like very sophisticated in a lot of its themes, that it was really ahead of its time. It's about Jeannie, who at the beginning of the novel, she has returned back to her hometown and is sharing her story with her friend Phoebe. And this is, in some ways, like you've probably heard of it, as called like a love story. It's also very much a self-actualization story for this girl and sort of her journey that she goes on. She has several husbands, and oh, I think I should have clarified because I don't think I did. She is a Black woman, and this is taking place in the early 20th century, like roughly the turn of the century. And this novel is very much about her experience with several husbands, and she moves from different communities with these husbands. And it's very much about her experience as a Black woman in this time period. And something I found very interesting is the fact that when this was published, and Zora Neale Hurston was writing in the Harlem Renaissance, and her, at that time period, and a lot of her contemporary male Black authors were dismissive of this novel and didn't think it was political enough or a good enough representation of the Black experience. And I think that she was so ahead of her time in terms of like intersectional feminism, because this book, I think, was not relatable to these men in terms of the Black experience, because at that time the Black experience was default male, but she is portraying a female Black experience, which is later recognized more formally through intersectional feminism as being not a subcategory of race and gender, but as the Black female experience is unique with its own sort of compounded suppression and issues of race and gender that demographic experiences. And I think that this author is so ahead of her time in capturing those dynamics within this time period. So this book has really sort of resurfaced. It was not known of for many years, and I think that it's resurfacing at a time that makes it at a time where it's going to be very appreciated. And I think this is a very excellent novel. I think it is an American classic, and any American really needs to read this book. Anybody should, but certainly as a reflection of like our nation's history, I think this is a very excellent book that everyone should read. Very, very good. I will mention that the author, she was an anthropologist, and she studied like folklore and as well as like ways of speaking. So this book is written in the vernacular, which I found at times a little bit hard to read, considering it's so short. I think that maybe you should just anticipate that it's a little bit harder to read because it's written in this like Southern Black vernacular at many points. Just the dialogue is that way. The rest of the book is in sort of traditional standard English, I suppose. In a similar vein, also about race in America, but published many years later, is Beloved by Toni Morrison. This book won the Nobel Prize, and it is an exceptional book. I don't think I've ever read a book that is as well crafted as this novel. It is a story of Setha is our main character, and she's the author, Toni Morrison, was inspired by a real life story. Setha has escaped from slavery. It takes place just before the Emancipation Act, and this character is Beloved, who comes back to haunt her both as a ghost and then in a physical form. And this story is told in a circular narrative style, where you have memories and traumatic events sort of pulling you backward to this circular style of storytelling. And so we hear the same events told over and over again from different perspectives in the book, from different characters in the book, in this way that is very reminiscent of like an oral tradition and telling stories repetitively. It also sort of compounds to show how like stories build on each other and like a collective memory is formed. I think that this book is so excellent in the way that it's crafted, because it's not in a linear narrative style, but you kind of know very early on in the book what happens, but it takes you a very long time to get to the event. I think that something that's really significant about this book, and important reason that it's important to read, is because like the events of history and slavery when read in a textbook can feel very you can feel very emotionally removed from them and know that they're morally wrong. But I think this book captures sort of the emotional and traumatic and psychological trauma and experience of that for the Black community, not just during slavery, but like the consequences afterwards. I think Toni Morrison really rises to that occasion of capturing that. And like the words are insufficient for me to even explain it, because it's just, this book is really, really excellent. For me personally, something that like I knew from history books was that slave owners owned these people, and then they also owned their children. If they had children, they owned their children. But I think this book brought to life for me how that commodification of human life also deprives individuals of paternity and maternity, and destroys the idea of the family unit for the entire Black community for hundreds of years. And like that is all something I knew factually, but something I think that this book illuminated emotionally, and was just so devastating to read. I think this book is something that every American should read. I think it captures the history of slavery in this emotional sense that I've never read anything like it before. And I think it's one of the, in terms of craft and skill and literary accomplishment, I think it's one of the best books I've ever read. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't. I think that someone who wants to read this book, as a reader, you need to know that Toni Morrison has said, and I would definitely agree, that this book, she expects of her readers that they participate in the reading practice. So if you are going to like skim through this or quickly read it or half-heartedly listen to it, you're not going to get a lot out of it. But when you like slow down and you engage with the story, it just like comes alive in this amazing way. And I read this book twice. The first time just trying to finish my reading for class on time quickly, and then the second time really diving into it, and I got so much out of it the second time. So I would really recommend that you save this book for when you have the time and energy to like give it what it deserves, and then like choose to engage with it that way. That's my opinion. I definitely recommend. Then the last book that I have to talk about is called The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler. And this is a really fun book. This is a fun note to end on. So in this novel, Philip Marlowe is the detective, and he's helping, I cannot remember, but a rich man who's being blackmailed with inappropriate photographs of his daughter. Oh, I need to say this takes place interwar period, so it's like in the 30s. So he's hired to take care of this problem, and in all of that he discovers a porn syndicate. There's like, you know, prohibition. He's like comes across, it's just like there's this underbelly of LA. It takes place in LA, and you follow him on this like crime solving thing. He's very like sort of rogue. The whole thing is very sexy, kind of this brooding, moody character who's like, has sort of this like chivalrous code to him a little bit. It's this novel, I could not picture it in color. Like it just has this old Hollywood vibe, and everyone was speaking in transatlantic accents. I could not imagine them any other way, and it was all in black and white. This novel is really like sexy and fast-paced and like really fun in that way, and just as a story I thought it was quite enjoyable for the most part. I think the first time I read it I sort of got to the end and I didn't know what to think about a lot of these elements, But after reading like several secondary sources, I feel like the author actually has so many interesting things that he's very subtly putting into this. So if you read this novel and you like it, I would actually really recommend reading some secondary sources on it. I would love to do another review on this book. It's very interesting. It's really very interesting. Oh, it just exists very well in its own right, but deeper examination really made it so much more interesting for me. So I think that's all that I'm going to talk about for now and like all of these books. Oh my gosh, I think this video is way too long, but I can't be bothered making it into more videos, so I hope you don't mind. If you had any particular thoughts on any of these, because like I said, I talked about them so much in my classes, I could speak a lot more to them in longer reviews, but I feel that that might be too ambitious for me to expect of myself right now or commit to in any way. But if you are interested in more reviews, like let me know down below and I could prioritize if I'm inclined to make more reviews of them in the future. Anyway, thank you for watching and I'll see you all in another video. Bye.